And that when this is accomplished, then the individual is whole, is totally aligned with the purposes of God, and consequently becomes a true magician who can do all things that are in conformity with God's will. Yes?
Now, are you saying, when you tried that in with Jung, is this something that Jung dealt with as well, what you're talking about, or was that side?
Well, you know, C.G. Jung was interested in a vast number of symbolic systems which he felt contained material of an archetypal and symbolic nature that would shed light on his psychological researches. And so the principal modality that he wrote a great deal about of that sort was alchemy. And about 4 major books in the collected writings are on that. But we know that from childhood on he had a tremendous interest in Gnosticism, and I explored that somewhat in my little book that is out there. And I have always suspected that he also had an interest in ceremonial magic, because that is really, next to alchemy, the most important symbolic modality. And let's not forget astrology, in which he had also a great practical interest and actually utilized it in his psychological work. So I just within the last year discovered that he had purchased and apparently greatly valued this particular magical codex. So he apparently studied that kind of thing too. I seriously doubted that he was walking around with a big wand and drawing circles on the floor and conjuring something in the bowling tower, although who knows? You know, but I really don't think so. I think it was a theoretical interest. See? So what we have here then is, like in the Abramelin system, we have the notion that by way of this symbolic magical instrumentality, the individual can become whole, can become united with the divine genius or the higher self. It's a descendant of the old Neoplatonic magic. But let's look at a couple of things here. Let's try to have a few definitions. I got sort of a little bit ahead of myself. Eliphas Levi, whom I just mentioned, has a definition of magic. He called it the art of effecting changes in nature in conformity with will. And H.P. pretty much endorsed that in Isis and in the Secret Doctrine. A latter-day student of ceremonial magic and Kabbalah, who was also associated with the British Theosophical Society, Dion Fortune, also a very fine sort of imaginative occult novelist. Dion Fortune's revision of that definition was the art of effecting changes in mind in accordance with will. By then the psychological approach began appearing, and I would give 2 definitions of my own, one being of a more general nature and more convoluted. Magic is the art of purposeful change effected in consciousness with the ultimate objective of enlarging the boundaries of the human psyche or soul. Or to put it more succinctly psychologically, another would be, magic is one of several symbolic modalities of individuation. That would be a Jungian definition. Now, as I said before, along with the figure of the prophet, you know, very important figure in Zoroastrian, Judaic, and Islamic religiosity, and by derivation in Christianity. Along with the prophet, the magus, the magician, is probably the most direct descendant of the old shamans in another setting. And just as the shaman is a traveler between the worlds, between, as the anthropologists call them, the 3 cosmic regions. These are envisioned spatially. Somebody questioned me about that later on because of its relationship to what we would call inner planes, but that spatiality is a metaphor. So it's very is to be envisioned very much like our onion skin way of looking at the physical, astral, etheric, and so forth planes. But the shaman is a traveler between through worlds, and this has been adopted by later on by the magician. There are the three cosmic regions, the ones where we are, which is the surface of the earth, then the heaven world above, where the sort of supernal spirits, angels, gods reside, and the netherworld or the underworld, what the ancients called the Tartarus, the Tartarian region, where a kind of earth and nature connected deeper and darker substratum of non-physical spiritual entities is said to dwell. And so just as the shamans travel between these three regions and often have as the symbol of that a pole, which the anthropologists call the axis mundi, the axis of the world. It can be a great big tree, it can be a totem pole, it can be the tent pole in the Gobi Desert and places like that. And they act out their travels often by when they climb up on this pole, they are going to heaven. When they climb downwards, they go into the underworld. And the successor of this is the magician's wand. Now, contrary to the wildly spreading rumors, this is not really a magician's wand. I can use it as a prop nevertheless, because a wand would be probably about this length, except that it usually has a metal tip on both ends, and it has a knob in the middle, and then it is painted or carved in two different colors, one white, one black. Yeah. Incidentally, yesterday I wore this white jacket to convince people that I'm not really a black magician. But you can see on the second occasion the black is beginning to creep up. Now we've got this and we've got this. So it's a good thing I'm not staying past tomorrow. Who knows what might happen. But it's usually in two colors, light and dark, and then depending on what kind of operation the magician conducts, if he is invoking to the gods, then he will put the one with the light color up and the dark one will point down. If he is performing an evocation, which is calling up the chthonic entities from below, then he will put the dark side of the wand up. And this wand is the successor really of the shaman's pole of the old axis mundi, the axis of the world. Now so we have then a certain number of procedures that this latter-day shamanism, which then reached a great development again in the Renaissance period. What you have really with ceremonial magic, you have a great flourishing of it in the Alexandrian period at the time of the Neoplatonists, Gnostics, Hermeticists, and people like that. Then it goes underground when the Christians come in for quite a period of time. But whenever there is a revival of the spirit of antiquity, it pokes up its head again. So there is a great revival of it in the Renaissance period because of the revival of ancient learning and the orientation toward Greco-Roman antiquity once again. So most of the books that we possess and descriptions of this symbol system go back primarily to the Renaissance period, because that's when it reached its highest expression. Now, I'll outline for you the system as it developed primarily in the Renaissance period, and show you how this could be conceived as a symbolic system of individuation. The ancients and the Renaissance magicians usually had first a series of preliminary practices which are to prepare the magus for the greater operations subsequently. These preliminary practices were usually two in number, although sometimes a third one is added to it, and they are the divination. So the individual would devote himself to divinatory practices, which were very, very common in the ancient days, but not with the intent of consulting the gods of various entities about mundane matters, how to sell your crops or how to raise your animals, but rather in order to create a bridge between your personal consciousness and the deeper world, a way of refining one's sensitivity to the greater worlds. And in the ancient times they had, of course, all kinds of divinations, anything from the flight of birds to which is called augury, to divining from the entrails of animals, a rather disgusting practice, I would think, and throwing of magical dice and all sorts of things. In later times, things like my beloved tarot cards developed, and astrology certainly in a certain aspect of its operation is also considered a divinatory modality. So in modern terms, however, what would we call all of these things? We would call them ways of bringing about, facilitating the occurrence of synchronistic events, so that the individual becomes attuned to an underlying relationship of the spiritual world and the physical world. What does, I don't know how well informed everybody is about Jungian psychology, but it will still make some sense. What does Jung say about synchronicity? He says that whenever an archetype, a really powerful, deep spiritual force, which is constellated in a particular keynote, begins to stir or rise within an individual psyche, a related or corresponding phenomenon in the physical world, more than one often, will occur, and one can, as it were, divine the rising and the movements and the intentionality of these greater interior meaning-producing forces by the signs that are produced outside, and that this is not a matter of cause and effect. Incidentally, this is another principle, I think, very worthy of study and of perhaps incorporation in some manner into our theosophical framework, because I think one of the great difficulties with the manner in which the secret doctrine and various theosophical teachings are treated by us is that we almost inevitably apply the causality principle to everything there. The synchronicity has not been reformulated and restated yet when H.P. wrote. And so we're always thinking about these various developments as cause and effect. Now, I don't mean to say that Jung invented synchronicity. I mean he rediscovered it and reformulated it. It's always been, if it's true, it's always been in existence. The ancients worked with it without calling it that. And it's very much part of that magical cosmos. There is a relatedness, there is a relationship. And the physical life and the physical world is capable of acting as a sort of a cosmic clock that tells psychological or spiritual time. And when we look at it, we can tell that the arms of the clock stand in a particular way, telling our spiritual time. An archetype, a god, or perhaps a darker god, an autonomous complex, is rising, and the synchronistic events are taking place. The key of which, of course, is meaning. I know that is old, very, very old hat to Joy and maybe to some of the others, but now, all right, what do we do with this sort of thing? What does the not very insightfully oriented occultist do with occult phenomena? He just gets fascinated by them and he says, wow, you know, wow, I saw an angel. Oh, by gum, I saw a bunch of nature spirits during the lecture or something like that. Oh, my clock stopped when grandma died. Isn't that wonderful? Now, it's all right. The question is, what is the meaning of all this? And the part of the magical cosmos, even as it is part of the psychological cosmos of Jung, is that these unusual phenomena occur always for a meaning. They don't just happen. And this is where, with all due respects, the clairvoyance of the 19th and the early 20th century, Bishop Leadbeater, Steiner, various other people, with all the great and wonderful things that they have done, are in need of some amendation, of some amendment, because they often create the impression that it's just an other world and you look into it and then you describe it. You know, Rudolf Steiner was big on that, describing the content of the inner worlds. People do it nowadays all the time. I've been listening to the tapes of a fascinating combination of Flake and Shaman, and I don't think he would protest against either of them, by the name of Terence McKenna. Have you heard of Terence McKenna, the mushroom man? Well, yeah, the fungoid teacher. Anyway, you know, and I'm truly reminded of that. It's in his own way. He is far less pompous and not German like Rudolf the Red-Nosed Steiner, but it's that kind of thing, you know. Well, you know, I'm describing to you all of these things that I have seen and experienced, and he starts out with the most astonishing sort of science fiction-y descriptions of the describing of the inner worlds, although he does try to bring some meaning into it every once in a while too. But so there is always that possibility of becoming just fascinated by that magical universe and then trying to tell about it. Which is one way of, I suppose, of dealing with the experience. But the key issue is meaning. So that a psychic phenomenon as a rule, but certainly there are occasions when the rule is broken, as a rule is a sign trying to tell us something about the meaning of our lives. Our lives. And that's not a reductionism, that's not trying to confine the universal glory to a personalistic framework, but it simply means that the universe exists in part to facilitate my becoming a universe. We are interrelated. And my higher meaning, the higher meaning of my life, is facilitated by the signs that come to me, and when they are of a very unusual nature, a really magical nature, then they are particularly powerful smoke signals or whatever the case may be. Wake up and look, because something is happening. So the very first thing, according to these systems, is that the would-be magus, the would-be magician, has to affinitize himself or herself to that kind of synchronistic principle in life, to begin to see the world as a magical universe within which the revelation of meaning goes on and on and on. So that's, so to say, the beginning. Now there is a little dispute between various old schools of magicians as to which one comes first, but we'll just sort of pick, we'll go up from the outer to the inner, from the lower to the higher. Oh yeah, I almost skipped one. Another, that's the second preliminary exercise, is that the magician needs to put himself or herself in touch with the essence, the spirit of the elements, earth, water, fire, and air. Not just the elementals, the gnomes, undines, salamanders, sylphs, but sort of the essential quality of the elements. And they had various things whereby they did that. Again, they're calling upon the elements, but the elementals were considered sort of the guardians of a region, again, a kind of a loca. And in the 19th century, when Westcott, H.P.'s friend and student, and some others put together the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, they even hit, by way of a little syncretism, on the Hindu tattvas. There was an Indian theosophist, Rama Prasad, who wrote a real seminal book at that time called Nature's Finer Forces, and they took various things from that. So they took the basic tattva symbols, which are it's really quite a nice and pretty harmless exercise that one might try if one wishes. They are very basic symbols. The symbol of earth is a yellow square. The symbol of fire is an upward pointing red fire triangle. The symbol of water is a sort of whitish silvery crescent moon standing upwards. The symbol of air is a blue blue circle, complete circle. And then there is the fifth that, of course, the West didn't have openly, but the Hindus always had the akasha, which is a blue-black egg-shaped. And what people would do is meditate on this in a visualizing fashion, and then sort of move through this as a gate into a certain psychological keynote of the elements. Ways of affinitizing oneself with the four elements. This incidentally brings up something about black and black magic too. One should not assume that in any kind of ceremonial magical situation, if the color black appears, for instance, as the black robe of the magician, or draperies on the walls, or coverings on altars and things of that sort, indicates evil. But it is very much like the color of akasha. The black is the color of creativity. It is the color of the dark night. Why is that? Because out of that blackness, the darkness, anything can come. It's the creative matrix.
That's why Krishna means black.
Yeah, the Krishna, the blue-black Krishna. He comes really from the deep creativity and is the creator in a sense. So that is a kind of metaphor that arose white and magic, white and black, but it would be really much more intelligent to say benevolent magic and malevolent magic, or even more importantly, magic with the intent of transcendence and transformation, or a magic that becomes personalistic and that derives, wants to just derive benefits for the individual. And that is the whole problem. Because all of these, beginning with divination and going now through the various steps of the system, if somebody is thus inclined, can be misused for personal ends and has been. But this is not the fault of the system. This is the fault of the frailties and the self-centeredness of individuals. Manly Hall, in his the big book that he published clear back in the late 1920s, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, has a nice chapter on ceremonial magic, and J. Augustus Knapp, the great illustrator who did all those things, a wonderful little romantic image there of this scraggling magician with a big beard standing with his wand in the circle, and what's an evocation, and out there is some entity that appeared that looks like a little bear. And the incense fumes are going up and everything. And then in that, at the end of that chapter, Manly Hall said, clear back in those days, he said that nowadays for real, he talks about black magic and so, for real sorcery, you have to look among the people who call themselves metaphysicians. And he was referring to a lot of the developments in the then, I think, very powerful New Age metaphysical not New Age at that time, New Thought. You know, there's always something new. And so New Age, New Thought eventually become old hat. You know how that goes? The new doesn't stay new very long. And of course what Mr. Hall means with that, and I discussed it with him, and he has exactly the same attitude about so many things in the New Age, is that again and again, mental, occult, magical considerations and symbols and forces are diverted to personalistic aims. To make me more powerful, me more rich, me get a new girlfriend or boyfriend, or maybe even, I don't know, a new cat, and me get a new car, me get my ingrown toenail healed, or whatever the case may be, me. It's that me that makes magic black. When, however, the sustained, informed dedication and consecration of the process is transcendence, so that I might transcend my personality, that I might become whole, that I might be united with the holy guardian angel and thereby with the divine, then the magic is what, quote, white or beneficent. That is really and by that definition, of course, what of all the things that go on in our glorious New Age, the chief keynote of the New Age magician, at least in Los Angeles, I don't know how it is elsewhere, is that by way of that grand principle of creating your reality, you can always create a parking space. That's the great magic. And I'm not just being facetious like I am so often, but I truly, if I haven't heard it, people go around strutting so proud of themselves. See, it works. You know, look, I found a parking place right there. They don't even say I found. I created it. I created it. Or what?
At the expense of someone
At
else.
the expense. Oh, sure. You come along and you don't have one. That's of course. But that is never considered. That is never considered. Let them create their own. But you know, but how much stuff is there to create? Oh, the universe is boundless. You know, it's the great.
But the parking spaces
So,
aren't.
yeah, but parking spaces aren't. You are so right. That's why we are having such a hard time with Besant Lodge. Isn't that true? You know?
How
Yeah.
much have you created on North Beachwood
Ye-
Drive?
I'm afraid I'm not a good New Ager. I think I should solicit people from the Bodhi Tree bookshop to see how we can create. But it's precisely that kind of, that is a trite example, but it's that kind of diverting of these greater forces for the purposes of the personality that creates the so-called black magic. However, time marches on. The next, usually the next step is one that's very controversial, because this is really the part of ceremonial magic that looks most like what many not very well informed people would immediately mistake for, quote, black magic. That is called evocation, calling forth, rather than calling in, which is invocation from above. And it's a strange practice, although very interesting. It's based on the, let's say, its rationale, which again we don't have to consider to be factual, but rather metaphorical, is that there are forces, beings, which are more powerful than the human, but which do not quite belong into the category of angels or gods, but which rather have become chthonic, earthly or subterranean, and they are called the Tartarian spirits. These are not to be confused with devils or demons of an evil nature. But there is a bit of a relationship. I can't go into it now, but there is a long tradition that's very, very fascinating and very, very weird, and has a great relationship to the Secret Doctrine, incidentally, too. And you find it in Judaism and in Islam, and in some very, very old sources in the literature of the so-called books of Enoch. And curiously enough, as I just found out in my research within the last few years, that the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the old Essenes on the shore of the Dead Sea, were very much involved in this lore, that there was a whole host of angels who sort of descended from God and became entangled in things down here. And they have become alienated really from the divine source. They are not bad, but they have become weird. And they are the ones who, for instance, in the Enochian lore, at one point, being lonesome, became very interested in human women, and that they became a certain sort of celestial human miscegenation, and from that came a race of giants like asuras, and so forth. Of course, you know, H.P. has all kinds of explanations of a similar nature in the Secret Doctrine. But the Essenes felt that a lot of these weird angels dwelt because they were banished to that to some extent, just under the surface of the ground in certain places, particularly where there were sort of natural springs and geysers and sulfurous fumes coming out of the earth, which was true of that part of the Dead Sea, and that they settled there for the specific purpose of talking with these angels and picking their angelic brains. So the old Dead Sea Scroll people were magicians, because these angels had a lot of important information to impart, because after all they know that. So in any event, in the evocation of magic is that sort of thing that is done. The ceremonial tone in these cases is very commanding, and the magician is to exert his will to a great extent, because these entities need to be commanded to talk or to do. So here the individual is always in command. The psychological explanation for this to a large extent would be somewhat along the line of forgotten, unconscious complexes and forces which need to be understood and need to be integrated in the psyche. Look at the symbolism. I'll describe to you the symbolism for Solomonic magic. You have a room that is darkened so that the imagination can work much better. You have a circle which has a certain dimensions, it doesn't matter. And the evoking magician stands in the circle. This is psychologically, this is the circle of the ego which protects him. Outside of the circle is a triangle which is called a triangle of manifestation. And in that triangle the evoked being is to appear. And the magician is never to step outside of the circle or break it, never get close to the triangle, because otherwise he will be possessed. He will be taken over, and that is to be avoided under all circumstances. And then there are these long conjurational formulae. There is the incense, which is specific to each and every one of these entities, and so forth. And then the interaction takes place, and then there are the banishing formulae, which are extremely important, so they say, because if the entity is not banished, then it will remain. And that may not always be so pleasant. In the 60s, there were a lot of these sort of hippie magicians who picked up all sorts of cheap magic books, and they started conjuring like crazy, and they thought that nothing happened. They have talked to some of them. They said, well, nothing happened, so we just went away and went out to have a beer or whatever. Well, sure, they came back, and then they had all kinds of curious manifestations in the room afterwards, because they didn't vanish. The forces come even if the individual is not aware of them. So there are certainly a very definite order for the manifestation of these things. And the essential benefit of this, again, is an enlargement of the consciousness of the magician and of other people being present, a greater familiarity with an aspect of life and of being that were outside of the scope of their cognition before. But even this is but a preliminary exercise. The supreme, the most important exercise is invocation. This is the invocation of the gods, of the angels, and it has to do ultimately really with the deification of the person, with the person becoming ultimately united with the holy guardian angel. Now our time is almost up, but I will go through this. Here I have a little scheme that's, I think, wonderfully simple, and that comes straight from Neoplatonic, really even more Hermetic sources from the old Hermetic system of the Alexandrian period, because there were three big magico-mystically oriented schools there at that time. The Neoplatonic, the Hermetic, and the Gnostic, and they are all very closely related to each other. Only one is allied to Plato, the other one is allied to Hermes, and the third one was allied to Christianity. So this was the Hermetic system of transformation. First, they said, comes metanoia, turning around which has been translated as conversion. And this occurs by intellectual means. It is a decision formed to change the direction of one's life, from the ways of the world to the ways of the gods. The setting is usually public instruction, like public lectures and things of that sort, sometimes the reading of books, and it is often regarded as a period of probation. The second one is what was called in Greek the instruction in the genikoi logoi, which means the logoses, the geniuses of the particular place, which means of the earth and of where one is, instruction in the spiritual forces in nature. By knowledge of them, ultimately command might be given of the individual over them. This is the origin of evocational, or as it has been called, goetic natural magic, which I just described. The third one is a transitional phase, and that was called by the Hermeticists the progress to the 7 spheres, the hebdomad, learning the initiatory prayers and the initiatory consciousness through the 7 spheres of limitation. And this is now very close to, and indeed in a sense has to do with invocation. The ancient, one of the easiest ways of visualizing that, oh my goodness, I have that diagram there too, is the progression through the 7 planets. The planets each had a guardian deity, after whom it is usually named, like Venus, Mars, and so forth. And so the individual addresses these one by one, from Earth to Moon, from Moon to Mercury, from Mercury to Venus, from Venus to Sun, from Sun to Mars, from Mars to Jupiter, from Jupiter to Saturn, the 7 sacred planets. And now here the idea is that these are the guardians who hold the soul in bondage, in a sense, or at least in earthly existence. And they have to be individually addressed, and then by addressing them and by familiarity, by knowledge, by gnosis of these deities, they will let you pass into the higher sphere. And then ultimately, when you have passed through the 7 planets, you enter the Ogdoad, as it was called, the 8th sphere, which is outside of the limitations of this world. I will read to you, well, maybe I won't, just in a minute, another minute or two. This circle gives us another little indication of how this magical mystical attitude worked. Let's say all true magic, all true mysticism aims at and originates in experience. So here is, let us say, the magical mystical experience of the gods, whatever it may be called. Every great religion, even of the consensus reality, always originates with that. Experience of Mohammed, experience of Zarathustra, experience of Moses, whatever the case may be. But then the great question occurs, what happens? What happens with that experience? It is my contention that in the consensus reality approach, such as we find in the majority religions, that experience is taken, and it's taken over here, and it becomes the two-pronged system of commandment and dogma, morals and dogma. So this is what happens in a popular religion. It is turned into that, which is useful for the maintaining of society, but which mystically becomes rather useless. Now, in the alternative system, in the magical system, instead of going off on this, what to me at least would appear to be a side tangent, the experience goes on, and now it is turned into myth. I conceived of this idea incidentally on the basis of a statement of Professor Quispel talking about the Gnostics, who said what distinguishes the Gnostics from the ordinary Christians, that the mystical experience is turned into myth. Now, why should that be? Because in the myth, the memory of the experience is kept alive. in the form of a metaphor. It mythically continues to happen. And that is tremendously important. The memory of the original experience is bound to fade in dogma and in morality. Not that belief and morality are not important at that own level, but they are incapable of keeping alive the mystical experience. But the myth can. Now, very frequently, the myth then in turn is amplified by the magical sacramental ritual, which is an enactment of the myth, isn't it? What is the Holy Eucharist but the center of it, the enactment of the myth of the transformation of the bread and wine into the body of the Lord? It's just like the old shamans, they say, as the gods have done, so we do now. We repeat their words, this is my body, this is my blood. And so there is, the myth is the play, like the libretto of the opera. The ritual is its performance. And now it is hoped that when things are properly done, and in the archaic times I think it almost inevitably happened, that by way of these two the soul is catapulted back to experience again. And it keeps going around. So there is a mechanism here whereby the original experience, Urerfahrung, as Jung called it in German, the original experience is capable of being repeated, and one can get back to it again instead of being diverted into these other channels. That is really a very essential feature of the magico-mystical method. And now in conclusion, to give you a little example of the invocation of the gods, I will read to you just a few passages from one of the scriptures of the Naj Hammadi collection, which is the Gnostic collection, but this is a particularly hermetic treatise, the treatise of the 8th and the 9th, which is an initiation discourse between a hermetic hierophant and the student, and as the hierophant and the student go to heaven and partain of the beatific vision, and this is when they come back and when they discuss what they have just seen. Well, first I'll give you a few words of the initiator, who is called Father, the representative Hermes, now prays and invokes, and he goes, I invoke thee who rules over the kingdom of might, whose words become an offering of light, whose discourses are immortal. He's speaking to the highest deity, whose will generates the life of the likeness everywhere, whose nature gives form to essence. From him proceed the souls and the angels which exist, and so forth. And he goes on, and then he ends, well, not quite at the end, but close to it, and he ends with a long series of magical vowel sounds, which is a chant, a mystic chant without any intellectual meaning. Now he is back and speaks of what he has seen, and he comes to the initiate and says, let us kiss each other, O my son, in love. Rejoice over this our vision, for already the power which is light is coming from them to us, whom we have invoked. I am now beholding depths ineffable. How shall I describe it to you, O my son? And then the son asked him, please, tell us more. And then now the father goes on singing, how shall I describe the all? I see another nous, higher mind, spiritual mind, who moves the soul, the psyche. I see the one who speaks to me through a holy sleep. Thou givest me strength. Now I see myself. I am willing to speak. I am overcome with the trembling. I have found the origin of the power above all powers, which has no origin. I see the wellspring of life bubbling up. I have said, O my son, that now I am the nous. He has been united with the higher self. I have seen what no human discourse can reveal. For the entire 8, the sphere beyond the 7 planets, O my son, is seen with the souls therein, and the angels are singing in silence. But I, the nous, now understand. I've always been so profoundly moved by that phrase where the angels sing in silence. And this is the eternal description of the result of the invocation of the gods, the achievement of the supreme magic. This is what Eliphas Levi called la magie haute, the high magic, the highest magic, and so it is. And so I think that for our contemplation we have now just to stimulate and to amplify our own experience some of the symbolic ways in which people have dealt with these great and mysterious matters throughout the ages, and that I think can be conducive to us acquiring an additional dimension of our theosophic understanding, and in so doing perhaps it will be granted to us in this lifetime yet, as ought to be granted to true theosophers, that we also will hear the angels sing in silence. So I thank you very much, and I hope this has been helpful.